There she was, kissing him like there was no tomorrow. I froze in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. The park was quiet, the only sounds the occasional rustling of trees in the evening breeze. I had driven there on a whim, checking her location as I felt something was off. I didn't expect this. Lauren, my wife, was standing in the arms of another man. Her hands tangled in his hair, her lips pressed to his. The worst part? She didn't even seem to care. This wasn't just a quick kiss or an innocent touch. This was passion, something I hadn't seen in her eyes in months, maybe longer. And it wasn't with me. I felt sick to my stomach. My mind screamed at me to turn around, leave before she noticed me. But something deeper, something darker, held me there. I took out my phone and started recording, capturing the proof I never wanted but desperately needed. They didn't notice me at first, their worlds so focused on each other. I could hear their laughter, their whispered words, but I couldn't make them out. I didn't need to. It was her smile. That smile. It wasn't the one she gave me at the end of a long day. This was something different, something only reserved for him. And then, when they pulled away, she kissed him again. More urgently this time, like she couldn't get enough. I wanted to scream, but I just stood there, my emotions running wild, my stomach twisting into knots. The truth was unbearable, yet I couldn't look away. The rage burned through me as I watched, still hidden in the shadows, unable to process what I was seeing. The wind seemed to stop as everything else around me became a blur. It was as if I'd been transported into a completely different world, one where my wife was no longer the person I thought I knew. I could feel my hands trembling, and before I even knew what I was doing, I marched forward, phone still recording. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow. My footsteps crunched on the gravel path, and I couldn't stop. I had to confront her, right then and there. They were still caught up in their own world when I stepped into the clearing. I cleared my throat, the sound loud in the quiet of the park. Lauren's eyes snapped to me, her face drained of color for a split second. The man she was with pulled away from her, a confused look crossing his face. She looked from him to me and back again, as if trying to figure out what to do. Well, I said, my voice low, almost dangerous. Didn't think I'd catch you red-handed like this, did you? Lauren's face twisted into something unrecognizable. She took a step back, stumbling slightly, her eyes wide with shock. Her lips parted, as if to say something, but no words came out. I could see the panic building inside her, but I couldn't care less. Why? The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. Why him? Why now? I couldn't stop the hurt, the confusion, the anger from seeping into my voice. She blinked rapidly, eyes darting to the man beside her. The silence between us felt like it lasted an eternity. "What are you talking about?" she finally said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. I was just talking to him. There's nothing going on. You're overreacting." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. Talking? That didn't look like talking to me. I raised the phone in my hand, showing her the video of her kissing him, holding him like she had no care in the world. "That's not just talking, Lauren. That's betrayal." Her eyes went wide as she saw the footage. I could see her panic building, but it wasn't the kind of panic that came from guilt. No, this was the kind of panic you saw when someone's caught doing something they knew they shouldn't. She quickly shook her head, trying to regain control. I don't know what you think you saw, but it's not what it looks like." Her voice was almost pleading now, and I could hear the defensiveness in her tone. "It's exactly what it looks like," I snapped, stepping closer. "You're here with him, and you've been lying to me for who knows how long." The words burned as they left my mouth, and I felt the weight of them hit me harder than any punch could. She took a deep breath, eyes flicking to the man beside her again. He looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure if he should leave or stay. The way he looked at her was all too familiar. It was the same way I used to look at her when we were happy. But now, that feeling seemed like a distant memory. "I'm sorry, okay?" Lauren said, her voice softer now, almost like she was trying to calm me down. "It's not what you think. I've been lonely, okay? You've been working all the time, and I needed someone to talk to." I couldn't believe my ears. "Lonely?" I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. "You're lonely, so you start making out with some guy in a park? What the hell is that supposed to mean?" She reached out for me, her hand trembling slightly, but I stepped back. The last thing I wanted was her touch. No, no, listen to me, she pleaded. I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. It was just a mistake. I was upset and I just needed someone. It doesn't mean anything. Please, don't leave me. But I was already done. Her excuses didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. I felt the anger surge again, hotter than before. She had the audacity to beg me, to make it sound like this was all just some minor issue that could be fixed with a few kind words. As if it were that simple. You think this is just a mistake, I said, voice steady but laced with venom. You think you can just kiss another man, let him touch you, and then come home like everything's fine? Like I wouldn't find out. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, but this time, there was no sincerity in her voice. It was all lies, just like everything else. I shook my head, my chest tight. I don't want to hear it. I don't need your excuses. I've had enough of your lies, Lauren. She reached for me one more time, but I stepped back, disgusted. You're not the person I thought you were. You've been lying to me for so long, and now, I finally see you for who you really are. A liar, a cheater, and I'm done. With that, I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't even look back. I couldn't bring myself to turn back. As I walked away, the weight of everything that had just happened crashed down on me. The anger was still there, but it was quickly being replaced by a cold emptiness. I couldn't believe how fast everything had unraveled. Just a few hours ago, I was thinking about our weekend plans, about how we would spend the evening together. But now I was alone in this mess of emotions, a betrayal. The drive home was silent, nothing but the sound of my car's engine humming in the background. Every turn felt like it was dragging me deeper into the pit in my stomach. The guilt started to creep in too, though I knew I had no reason to feel guilty. She was the one who had betrayed me, who had torn apart the trust we'd spent years building. Yet, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow missed something, some sign that could have prepared me for this moment. When I walked through the door of our house, everything felt foreign. The familiar, comforting scent of dinner that used to greet me at the end of every day was gone. There was no soft music playing in the background, no sound of Lauren moving around the kitchen. Instead, everything was eerily still. Empty, just like I felt. I sat down on the couch, still holding the phone that had recorded everything. The video was still open, and I stared at it for a long moment. It was hard to reconcile the woman in the video with the woman I thought I knew. The one in the video was confident, alive, full of desire and passion, but it wasn't for me. It was for someone else. And I couldn't help but wonder how long it had been going on. How long had she been lying to me? How long had she been slipping away from me without me even knowing? The tears didn't come at first. There was no sobbing, no collapse of emotion. It wasn't sadness that hit me at that moment. It was a sickening realization that the person I had loved, the person I thought I could trust, wasn't who she had pretended to be. I had been living a lie for so long, and now the truth was exposed in a way that I couldn't deny. It wasn't until much later, when the sun began to set, that the tears finally came. And they didn't come in a rush, no. It was slow, almost agonizing, each tear falling as I let my thoughts drift over the years we'd spent together. The memories of her smile, the way she would laugh at my stupid jokes, the way we had shared everything. It all felt like a cruel joke now, like none of it had ever been real. She had been pretending. She had been acting, playing a part to keep me in the dark while she carried on with someone else. I thought about how much I had trusted her, how I had made sacrifices for us, how I had poured my time, my energy, my heart into a marriage I thought was built on something solid. But now it felt like I'd been living in a house of cards, always one breath away from it all falling apart. And it had. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her text messages or anything she had left behind. I didn't want to see the lies she'd written, the excuses she'd fed me over the years. I had already seen enough to know that everything had been a facade. I didn't need more proof. I picked up my phone again and stared at the video. This time, though, it wasn't just about seeing the betrayal. It was about the validation that this wasn't just my imagination running wild. The truth was right there in front of me. And as much as I hated it, as much as I wished it weren't true, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, But when the darkness of the night settled around the house, I finally stood up. There was no more avoiding this. I had to face what had happened, and I had to figure out what to do next. I had no idea where to start, what to feel, or even if I was ready to confront her again. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this define me. I couldn't let her actions define me. When she finally returned home hours later, I was sitting in the same spot, phone in hand, waiting for her to come back and give me her excuses, her lies, her justifications. But I didn't know if I was prepared for the flood of emotions that would come once she stepped through the door. Would she apologize? Would she lie some more? Or would she try to manipulate me into forgiving her, just like she had done so many times before? As the door creaked open and I heard her footsteps approaching, my pulse quickened. But this time I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. I was done letting her control the narrative. The truth was right there, plain and simple. And it wasn't going anywhere. The moment Lauren walked through the door, everything seemed to stop. The air felt thick, suffocating. She hesitated, seeing me sitting there, staring at the phone in my hand. Her eyes flickered to the screen, then back to me, and I saw the same familiar defensiveness flash across her face, that little mask she had perfected over the years. She wasn't ready to face the truth yet, but I knew that I was ready to force her to. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. It was as though we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. I had no interest in pretending anymore. I wasn't going to be the one to ease her into it, to let her feed me another excuse. Not this time. She was going to have to answer for her actions, for the destruction of the trust that had once bound us together. So, how was your little rendezvous at the park? I finally asked, my voice colder than I meant it to be, but I couldn't bring myself to care. She stiffened at the question, but didn't answer immediately. She wasn't ready to face the consequences. I could tell. Instead, she slowly set her bag down on the counter and began to walk towards me, taking slow steps, as if she was trying to gauge my mood. Look, I don't know what you think you saw, she started, her voice trembling just a little, but she quickly regained her composure. But it's not what you think, okay? You have to understand, I didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Hurt me? You think this is about you accidentally hurting me? I stood up abruptly, anger surging up inside me, my fists clenching. It's about betrayal. It's about you lying to me, sneaking around behind my back like I'm some kind of fool who wouldn't find out. She flinched at my words, but then quickly put on her usual defensive act, that cold, calculating mask she wore whenever she knew she was caught. You're overreacting, she said, her voice firm. It wasn't like that. It wasn't intentional. You've been so distant lately. I needed someone who actually noticed me, who made me feel good again. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even close to feeling remorse. Instead, she was trying to justify her actions, trying to make me feel like I was the one who had somehow failed her. She didn't even have the decency to admit the truth. She was so far gone in her own manipulation that she couldn't even see how badly she had crossed the line. You think I haven't noticed you? I shot back, struggling to keep my voice steady. I've been working my ass off to provide for this family, to make sure everything's taken care of. And what do I get in return? A wife who sneaks off to a park to kiss another man? What's wrong with you? Lauren's face twisted into something that resembled irritation more than guilt. You're always working, always too busy. I don't even know who you are anymore. She took a step closer, and I could see the arrogance in her eyes. She was getting defensive, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate this situation. I've been doing everything I can for us, I said, my voice rising with every word. And what do I get in return? You telling me that you were lonely, that I didn't give you enough attention. So, you go off and kiss someone else? You think that's going to make it better? Do you think that's some kind of excuse? She crossed her arms, clearly frustrated, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I moved toward her, holding my phone out. The video was still playing, a constant reminder of what she had done. You want to tell me it's not what it looks like? I asked, my voice shaking now with raw emotion. Look at this. Look at how you looked at him. Look at how you kissed him. You think I don't see it? You think I don't feel the way you've been lying to me for God knows how long? Lauren's eyes flickered, and I could see the panic rising in her, but she quickly masked it with a forced calmness. She looked at the video, then back at me, and I could see the walls going up again. She wasn't going to take responsibility. She wasn't going to admit she had been wrong. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "I didn't want to hurt you. I swear. I just needed someone who could listen, who could make me feel wanted. You don't understand. You've been so distant." I clenched my jaw, refusing to let her words break me. "I understand perfectly," I said, each word biting. "You think I don't get it? You think I don't know how hard things have been? But that doesn't give you the right to go behind my back and cheat on me, Lauren. That doesn't give you the right to destroy everything we've built." She stood there for a moment, silent, but I could see the shift in her. The deflection wasn't working anymore. The truth was too loud, too overwhelming. She had nothing left to say, but she wasn't going to back down either. She wasn't going to admit to the one thing that could end this entire charade. "I don't know what you want me to say," she finally said, her voice small now, almost pleading. "I didn't think you would find out." The audacity of that statement hit me like a ton of bricks. She didn't think I would find out. That's what she thought of me. That I was some clueless fool who wouldn't notice the lies, the infidelity. I had been blind, but I wasn't blind anymore. "I want you to admit what you've done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now. "I want you to admit that you've betrayed me, that you've been lying to me. I don't care about your excuses anymore. I just want the truth." But all she could do was look at me, guilt and defensiveness clashing in her eyes. She couldn't say the words, and in that silence I realized that this was over. I was done. Lauren stood there, her arms crossed defensively across her chest, her eyes darting around a room as if she could find a way out of this, as if there was any excuse that could possibly make this situation better. But I knew better now. The illusion was gone. The woman standing before me wasn't the person I had shared my life with. She was a stranger who had carefully constructed a web of lies that I had been living in for far too long. "You still haven't answered my question," I said, my voice steady, even though I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, my heart aching with each passing second. "Why him? What did he give you that I couldn't?" She flinched, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. It was a brief moment, but it was there, and I knew she felt it. But before I could say anything else, she quickly masked it, returning to her usual cold, indifferent demeanor. "Don't make me out to be the villain here," she snapped. "You've been so wrapped up in your work, you didn't even notice I was falling apart. I've been telling you for months that I needed more attention, that I needed more from this relationship, but you couldn't hear me. You were too busy, too distracted to even care." I let out a dry laugh, the bitterness almost suffocating. "So, because I was focused on building a future for us, you decide to go sleep with another man?" The words hit me like a slap. I couldn't even believe I was saying them out loud. "That's how you solve your problems? By betraying everything we built? By breaking the trust we spent years establishing?" Her face flushed, but she wasn't backing down. "It's not like that," she said, though the defensiveness in her voice only confirmed that it was exactly like that. "I didn't plan it. It just happened. I needed someone to talk to understand me, to make me feel special again. And he was there. He listened, and for once, I felt like I mattered." My mind spun as I processed her words. She hadn't even acknowledged how much damage she had caused, how deeply she had cut into the heart of our relationship. Instead, she was justifying her actions, making herself the victim. She was telling me that I wasn't enough, that all the effort I had put into this marriage, into our life, meant nothing because she hadn't gotten enough validation from me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had spent so many years pouring my soul into making sure we had everything we needed. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough because she hadn't been looking for validation from me. She had been looking for something else, something I couldn't give her. "What about the vows we made?" I asked, my voice now trembling with frustration. "What happened to in sickness and in health? For better or for worse? Was that all just a lie too?" She opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. For a brief second, I thought I saw something resembling remorse in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold, calculating look that I had seen so many times before. I'm not the one who's been cheating, am I? She retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You were never there when I needed you. Always working, always busy. I couldn't just keep waiting around for you to come home. So don't act like I'm the only one at fault here. That was it. The final straw. She was trying to shift the blame onto me, accusing me of neglecting her, of not being the perfect husband that she felt entitled to. She had found her excuse, and now she was going to hide behind it, as if that somehow made what she did okay. I stood there, speechless for a moment, my mind struggling to catch up with the tidal wave of emotions crashing over me. How had we gotten here? How had we gone from building a life together, sharing dreams and plans, to this mess of lies, betrayal, and broken promises? I felt nauseous, the weight of everything suddenly becoming too much to bear. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had taken something from me. She had taken my trust, my love, and my belief in our future. All it was gone now. I didn't know if I could ever get it back, even if I wanted to. I turned away, needing space to breathe, to think. My heart was racing in my chest, my hands shaking with the anger and betrayal that I couldn't fully process yet. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't listen to her words because every single one felt like a punch to the gut. I walked over to the window, staring out at the empty street, the world outside moving as if nothing had changed, as if my entire life hadn't just crumbled in front of me. I could hear Lauren behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. You're just going to walk away? She asked, her voice sharp now, tinged with frustration. After everything we've been through, you're just going to give up on us? I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, but I held it in. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. I wasn't going to let her turn this into some kind of emotional game where I was the bad guy for standing up for myself. I'm not the one who's giving up on us, I said, my voice steady but cold. You are. You've already made your choice. You've already shown me who you really are. I don't have anything left to say. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. It was over. The house felt suffocating. Every breath I took seemed to carry the weight of everything that had just happened, the air thick with the residue of betrayal. I could still hear her voice echoing in my mind. You're always working. I needed someone. The words replayed over and over, but no matter how many times I heard them, it didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Lauren stood there, a few feet away from me now, waiting for me to respond, for me to say something, anything. But I had nothing left to say. I had spoken my piece, and now I was done. She had already shown me who she was, and frankly, I didn't want to see any more. The woman I thought I knew, the one I had trusted with everything I had, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone who had betrayed me without a second thought, someone who had justified her actions as if it was all just a misunderstanding. Her silence now felt louder than any word she could say. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even acknowledging the depth of her betrayal. It was almost like she was waiting for me to break, to beg her to stay, to tell her that everything would be okay. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Not anymore. I don't know what you want me to do, she finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter now, almost tired. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't know how to fix this. I turned to look at her, and for the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. She wasn't this loving wife who had simply made a mistake. She wasn't the person I had spent years building a life with. No, she was someone who had been living a lie, who had chosen to betray me instead of facing her issues head-on, who had used me as a fallback when things didn't go her way. Fix this, I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. You don't fix this, Lauren. You can't just undo everything you've done. You don't get to cheat on someone and then act like everything will be fine just because you say you're sorry. Her face twisted with frustration. I never said I thought everything would be fine, she shot back. But we've been together for so long. Don't you think we owe it to each other to at least try to fix things? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Try to fix things? You've been lying to me for God knows how long, sneaking around behind my back, and now you want me to just try? Like nothing happened. I didn't think it would get this far, she murmured, her voice small, almost apologetic. But the apology wasn't real. It didn't feel like it was coming from a place of genuine remorse. It felt like a rehearsed line, something she had learned to say when she was caught in her own web of deceit. I stared at her for a moment, taking in the woman who had once meant everything to me. How had it come to this? How had I allowed myself to fall so deeply into her lies? It was like a veil had been lifted, and I was finally seeing the truth for what it was. She wasn't the victim here. I was. I was the one who had been deceived, the one who had been made to feel like I wasn't enough. The anger started to rise again, but this time it was different. It wasn't directed at her. It wasn't the blind rage that had filled me earlier. It was something else, something quieter, more painful. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to become so entangled in her lies, so desperate to believe in something that wasn't real, that I had lost sight of who I was. You don't get it, do you? I asked, my voice low and steady. You think you can just apologize and everything will be fine. But I'm not the one who has to fix this, Lauren. It's you. You've broken everything, and it's up to you to own up to it. Not me. Her face fell, and I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes, but it was fleeting. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off before she could speak. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. She looked at me, the mask finally cracking, and for the first time in this entire conversation, she looked vulnerable. But it wasn't enough. It didn't change what had happened. It didn't undo the damage she had caused. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. It felt like I was walking away from a life I had built, from everything I thought I knew. But it also felt like I was walking toward something new, something free of the lies, the deceit, and the heartbreak that had come to define my marriage. I wasn't sure where I was going next. I wasn't sure how I would pick up the pieces of my life. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here. Not with her. Not after everything. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking slightly, but I didn't stop. I opened the door and stepped outside into the cool night air, the world around me still spinning. My mind was racing, my emotions all over the place, but in that moment, I felt a sense of clarity. The pain was still there, deep inside me, but it was no longer the thing that defined me. I had been betrayed, yes, but I wasn't going to let that betrayal consume me. I wasn't going to let her actions define who I was. As I walked down the street, I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was going forward. And that was enough. For now, it had to be enough. The next few days felt like I was living in a haze. I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire life had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. Everything was different now. The house felt strange, like it wasn't mine anymore, like the walls themselves were closing in on me. I kept expecting to hear Lauren's voice, to feel her presence in the kitchen or in the hallway, but it was all gone. And yet, her absence was the loudest thing in the room. The silence was deafening. At first, I stayed in the house, trying to sort through my emotions, trying to figure out what came next. But it quickly became clear that I couldn't stay there. The memories were everywhere. Our old photos, the little mementos of trips we had taken, the books we had read together. Each one felt like a reminder of the life I thought we had, the life I had worked so hard to build. But it wasn't real. It was all a facade, a lie that had been carefully constructed over the years. I couldn't stay there, trapped in the remnants of what we had. So I packed a bag and left. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I found myself walking aimlessly through the streets, trying to outrun the thoughts that kept circling in my head. How did this happen? What did I miss? It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept reliving that moment in the park, seeing Lauren in the arms of another man, her eyes sparkling with something I had never seen in her when she was with me. That was the hardest part to accept, the fact that she had been capable of such deceit, that she had been hiding this side of herself from me all along. As I walked, I found myself drawn to a small cafe. The warm light from inside beckoned me, and I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. I hadn't planned on stopping anywhere, but I needed a distraction, something to occupy my mind, to stop the constant replay of memories that threatened to swallow me whole. I ordered a coffee and sat at a small table near the window, watching the world pass by. The cafe was quiet, but there was a certain peace in the stillness. I needed this. I needed to be alone, to think without the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. But the thoughts kept coming, the questions I couldn't answer, the hurt I couldn't escape. What did I miss? What signs had I ignored? Had she been lying to me for months? For years? How could I have been so blind? I realized then that I didn't have the answers. I didn't have the closure I was desperately seeking. I could keep asking myself questions, but they wouldn't change anything. I had already seen the truth, and no matter how many times I played the events over in my mind, I couldn't undo what had happened. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but it was starting to fade. It wasn't going to disappear overnight, but I was beginning to understand something important. I was going to be okay. I didn't need her to validate me. I didn't need her to apologize or beg me to stay. What I needed was to take control of my own life again. I needed to rebuild, to find a way to move forward without her, without the lies, without the heartache. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. I had to be. The next few days were a blur. I spent time talking to friends, staying with family, doing anything I could to fill the void left by Lauren. But there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the anger. The betrayal stung in ways I couldn't fully express, and I found myself lashing out in small ways, getting frustrated at work, snapping at people who didn't deserve it. It wasn't who I wanted to be, but it was part of the process, part of dealing with the overwhelming emotions that came with the loss of trust. Lauren didn't reach out after I left. I didn't expect her to. She had made her choice. She had crossed the line, and there was no going back from that. She could pretend to be sorry, but I knew better now. She had chosen her path, and I wasn't going to walk it with her anymore. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wondered if I had made the right decision. The loneliness was unbearable at times. The silence in my apartment was like a constant reminder of everything I had lost. I missed the companionship, the familiarity of sharing my life with someone. I missed the feeling of being needed, of knowing that someone was there, someone who cared. But then I remembered the pain, the lies, the deceit, and I knew that I couldn't go back to that. I couldn't let myself be consumed by the idea of what could have been, what I thought we had. The truth was out now, and I couldn't ignore it. Lauren wasn't the person I thought she was, and I couldn't unsee what I had seen. The hardest part wasn't leaving her. It was letting go of the dream we had shared. It was accepting that the person I had trusted, the person I had built my future with, wasn't the person I thought she was. And once I let go of that dream, once I realized that I deserved more than the lies she had fed me, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to settle for less. I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small, make me feel like I wasn't enough. I deserved more than that. It would take time, I knew that. Time to heal, time to rebuild, time to rediscover who I was without her. But for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone. I had myself, and that was enough. The weeks following that day in the cafe were a blur of ups and downs. Some days felt like I was walking through a fog, barely keeping it together, while others felt like small victories, like moments where I could finally see a little light at the end of the tunnel. The pain wasn't gone, but it was becoming more manageable. I was slowly learning how to live without the weight of betrayal hanging over me, how to take each day one step at a time. I moved out of the house, finding a small apartment in a quiet part of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. The first few nights were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and I couldn't help but feel the absence of Lauren's presence in the spaces I had once shared with her. It was like living in a memory, surrounded by traces of the life I had lost. But I slowly began to adjust. I started to fill the empty space with things that were just for me. Books I had meant to read, but never had time for, old records I hadn't listened to in years, and small, simple pleasures that had been overshadowed by the chaos of my marriage. I went out with friends, reconnected with family, and began to rediscover parts of myself that I had neglected for far too long. I started going to therapy. At first, I wasn't sure if it would help, but it was a safe space to talk about everything I had been through, everything I was feeling. I learned a lot about myself during those sessions, about why I had stayed in a relationship that was so toxic for so long. I learned that my worth wasn't tied to the validation of another person, that I didn't need anyone to define me. And as the weeks passed, the pain began to fade. The anger and the sadness weren't as sharp anymore. They still lingered in the background like old scars that would never fully heal, but they weren't the first thing I felt when I woke up in the morning. The more time I spent away from Lauren, the more I realized how much I had allowed myself to lose in the name of love. How much of my own happiness I had sacrificed to try to make someone else happy. I wasn't sure what Lauren was doing in that time. I didn't care. It didn't matter anymore. I had stopped waiting for an apology that was never going to come, stopped hoping that she would come back and beg me to take her back. The truth was, I had been holding on to something that wasn't real for far too long. I had spent too much time trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. There were moments when I thought about reaching out to her, when I thought about the good times we had shared. It wasn't all bad. We had laughed together, shared dreams, and built a life that had seemed so perfect at one point. But those memories had become tainted, overshadowed by the lies and the betrayal. They weren't enough to undo the hurt she had caused, to make me forget the way she had broken my trust. I realized that I'd been holding on to a version of her that no longer existed. I had been holding on to a version of us that was never going to come back. And once I let go of that, once I stopped looking back and started looking forward, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments where I felt overwhelmed by the pain of it all. But with each setback came a lesson, a realization that I was growing stronger, that I was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked out of that house. I was someone new, someone who had been through hell and come out the other side. And that person deserved better than what I had gotten. As the months passed, I found myself thinking about the future, not with dread, but with hope. I didn't know what it would look like. I didn't know if I would ever fall in love again, or if I would ever trust someone the way I had trusted Lauren. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to settle. I wasn't going to let the pain of my past define me. I had learned to stand on my own, to be my own person, and that was the most freeing thing I had ever experienced. I started going on dates again. It wasn't easy, but I forced myself to put myself out there. I learned that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It was something that had to be earned, something that had to grow over time. But I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't going to rush into another relationship to fill the void that Lauren had left. I was going to take my time to focus on me, to figure out what I wanted out of life and out of a relationship before I let anyone else in. I also realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. Being alone didn't mean I was unworthy, didn't mean that I was less than. Being alone meant that I had the space to figure out who I was, what I wanted, and what kind of life I wanted to build. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. And though there were days when I still thought about Lauren, still wondered what might have been if things had been different, I knew in my heart that I was better off without her. The woman she had become wasn't someone I could ever trust again. And I wasn't going to let her define my happiness. In the end, I learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to walk away from someone you love. But in doing so, you give yourself the chance to love yourself again. You give yourself the chance to rebuild, to grow, and to become the person you were always meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally say I was okay. This was my story of betrayal, but it wasn't the end of my journey. It was only the beginning.